So I've actually kind of divided this up into 3 areas. So I'm going to get you guys to keep me on time, okay? The first one is, how did I get to be standing in front of you here today to have them say these things about me? And I always want to look around and say, okay, who's that? You know, because I still don't really, it doesn't really, it's not something that I think about when I'm out in public, about what I've done. I'm always thinking about what I'm going to do tomorrow and how I'm going to change healthcare. Because I think my role has been to be a game changer in healthcare. I did not start out that way. I started exactly where you are, sitting in seats in my nursing class and doing silly things like write on my attendance sheet, IV drip, and also, you know, anything to bug the nursing instructor, and, you know, dumb things that I go back now and I think, yeah, well, at least my students don't do that to me. So the first half is about how I got to be here in front of you. The second half is about what forensic nursing is. And the third half is, what would I tell you after 4 decades of nursing as you enter an absolutely wonderful profession? So, first of all, when I was 6 years old, I was involved in a car crash. Now, notice that I said car crash. I didn't say car accident. There's a reason for that, which caused me to have life-threatening injuries. It was only by a miracle that I was able to get to a hospital which was 90 miles away and survive. And there was a nurse, a student nurse, who cared for me. Was in the operating room, so I had the experience of being with an operating room nurse and team. I actually came through what was known as outpatients because there wasn't such a thing as emergency nursing then. And then I was unconscious for 3 days and on a pediatric ward. And when I woke up and kind of figured out where I was, remember, I'm 6 years old, there was this nurse who was so kind to me. She took a frightened little child whose parents were not there because parents weren't allowed to be with you all the time because it might upset you. And here I was, I had huge incision on my abdomen, and I had something dripping into my arms. Well, you know what? She took me under her wing literally because I thought she was the most wonderful person in the world. And I can still remember to this day when I was able to get up and walk around, when she would go around to the other children, I would sit outside the room where she was caring for other children. Hang on to that thought because there's an important message there which I'll tell you at the end. So I came home and I survived. I was in the hospital about 3 weeks. And I told my mom I was going to be a nurse, just like so-and-so. And she was a student nurse, extremely important to remember that too. So my whole goal in life as I was growing up and going to grade school, high school, etc., was to become a nurse. And I grew up in the day when there was only about 3 opportunities for women in the work world. One was to become a teacher, one was to become a nurse, and the other was to become a secretary. Or you got married. Well, that wasn't quite the way I wanted my life to go. So I applied to schools of nursing and they told me that I was too young. Oh boy, what am I going to do? So a friend, actually the guidance counselor, said, well, why don't you go to the university? They'll take you. So I went to the school of nursing there and they said, oh sure, you can come. Doesn't matter how old you are. So I went. So I ended up being a 5-year degree nurse when that didn't exist at the time. There was only a few places in Canada. And I loved every bit of my nursing, every single bit of it. I was explaining here that I thought I was going to be an operating room nurse, and then after the first couple of weeks, like, nope, thank you. And then it was like, okay, well, I want to do this. No, I don't want to do that. And I fell in love with obstetrics, and oh, I was just all over the map. And at the end of the day, it came out that I was offered a job to teach. And I thought, okay, that's pretty good, eh? So I went to teach in a 2-year nursing program because that's what the transition of healthcare was. And after about a year, I realized there was something missing. I went into nursing to care for patients. It was great being an educator, but it wasn't giving me what I needed for me. So I went back to the bedside. And one of my former instructors said, come and work for me in emergency. And I thought, what if I could ever do an emergency? Well, reality is I liked it so well I stayed for 30 years. You know, and she laughs because she says, you know, you fit. And I did not in my wildest dreams ever think that I was going to be an emergency nurse. So during that time I dealt with trauma, violence, crime, everything from beginning to end, life and, you know, babies being born in your emergency department to people dying in front of you. And I loved it. I loved the trauma. And I was good at it. Very good. I ended up moving to from Saskatchewan to British Columbia and becoming the educator at Surrey Memorial Hospital in the emergency department. I created the role that you now call nurse clinician back long time ago. During that time I found that I'd been so busy doing in emergency that it was kind of losing its, okay, the dreadful stuff, the junky stuff, you know? Like, only time I wanted to really be there was going to the trauma room, because that tested every skill I'd ever learned in the 35 years of nursing. And then one day, something happened. We had a sexual assault come into our department, and that person had waited on the night shift for a long period of time. And the manager of the emergency department said, you know, Sheila, go and have a look and see what this is. Is there anything here that's not best practice? And I was like, oh yeah, sure. That's what educators do, right? We go to best practice. And it hit me almost immediately. The care that we were providing in emergency to those who had been sexually assaulted was exactly the same as my very first patient back in 1970. 20-some years, 30, actually it was 22 years. Nothing had changed. Okay, cardiac nurses. What if something never changed in 22 years? You'd be accused of malpractice, wouldn't you? What about pediatrics? What if you never changed anything in 22 years when you're dealing with children? What about neurology, psychiatry, obstetrics? All of those things had progressed, were innovative, changing, but not the care of the sexually assaulted individual. And I did the research. I told my manager that, you know what, we were providing substandard care, as was every other facility in our province and nationally, and actually internationally, truth be known. So I created the Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner program, and when I finished creating it, I wanted to be one. So I made sure I took the first class because I designed it. And I also made very sure that I was going to be the first nurse, because if I'd screwed up, I wanted to have the responsibility on me. So I was the first nurse in British Columbia to do an examination where normally a physician would do the examination. And I went on to become one of the few nurses that testify in court regularly around sexual violence. So that's how I got to be here, because BCIT saw an opportunity to expand into a new role, which was now called forensic nursing. And they said, here, come and help us do it. But notice I'm not in healthcare, I'm in forensic care. So I'm with law officers, I am with criminologists, I'm with psychologists, I'm with DNA experts, the forensic science, and I'm the token nurse, and I love it. So part of that was that I developed the first program in Canada where you could actually come and go to a classroom and learn about forensic healthcare, forensic nursing. So what is forensic nursing? Well, forensic nursing is where we have legal system, justice, law enforcement, whatever you want to call it, over here. And we have healthcare over here. And often they meet because their complainant or victim or accused is our patient. And they're supposed to intersect. Well, reality, what happens is they collide like that. Because just think of how victims are treated in our society. Not just sexual assault. Because forensic nursing goes from the birth of a child to a drug-addicted mom to a workplace death, which is investigated by a forensic nurse. and everything in between. So any specialty you want, I can give you examples where you're already doing forensic nursing. It permeates every bit of healthcare because you never know which patient of yours is going to have to testify in court about something or have to talk to ICBC about that car crash. If you say accident, there's a different connotation than car crash or incident. An accident is something that maybe might be preventable, in reality as things aren't. There's intentional trauma and unintentional trauma. And it's really a car incident, car crash if you want, or a vehicular crash. And the terminology is changing over the years. So when I say that they intersect or collide, that I as a nurse may have very different way of treating a patient compared to somebody who wants to get a statement from them, or have them appear before ICBC about the car crash, or talk about what's happened to their child at school, or the woman who's been trafficked, or the person who has been a victim of robbery, or the person who is the accused in any crime you want to name, because they end up in healthcare. Forensic mental health, forensic psychiatry, forensic, corrections, all that is intertwined. So when you look at what the roles are for a forensic nurse now, and just so you know, this isn't just Canada. In 1992, same year I started the program that I started, there was formed an International Association of Forensic Nurses. I didn't find out about them because we didn't have a lot of that thing called the internet. It was pretty new. And somebody told me that there was this conference for forensic nurses, and I remember going to powers that be that hold the purse strings at the hospital, saying, I want to go to Louisville, Kentucky to a conference on forensic nursing. And they looked at me like I was nuts. What? So anyway, I talked them into it. I'm not sure what I promised, but I did promise something. So I went, and from being the odd person in my sphere of healthcare, I met people from all over the United States and 2 other people from Canada that shared that same desire to become the leader of change in healthcare response to violence and trauma. That organization elected me as their first non-US president in 1994. Sorry, I lied, 2014. I joined them in 1994. But 20 years later, they elected me their president. So it shows that the forensic nursing has gone from a very isolated, tiny little piece here in British Columbia and Winnipeg, Manitoba, because we were the first programs, to global. I know forensic nurses in about 25 different countries. And when I say know them, it means that we email back, we exchange ideas. We have developed that specialized body of knowledge that we know is a specialized thing for nursing, like all the other specialties out there. So it means that there is a forensic nurse that is now working for WorkSafe BC. He's one of my former students. He's also a former coroner. He's also a former police officer. I call him the poster child for forensic nursing. We have coroners that are nurses working in all sorts of areas of BC nursing coroner system. We have nurses that are working in corrections. We have them working in psychiatry. We have forensic nurses working in emergency departments as part of that milieu that deal with child abuse, elder abuse, intimate partner violence, human trafficking, sexual violence, and a few other areas that we are still developing. So that's how I got from being the little girl sitting outside the door of a student nurse where she was caring for somebody to being a forensic nurse. I just finished writing a chapter on forensic nursing for a Canadian textbook. It took me 6 months. But you know why I did it? Because it promotes nursing. Always, first and foremost, you are a nurse, and then you're whatever. You're that cardiac nurse, or you're that pediatric nurse, or you're that forensic nurse. And would I want you to have a look at being a forensic nurse? Absolutely. Why? because it's the new kid on the block and it's going to change healthcare, even more than it is now. Do you know how many programs there are now in Canada that deal with sexual violence? There's over 60, compared to 1992 when there were 2. World Health, I just got back from Geneva in September. I was the only forensic nurse invited to participate in a global meeting on violence, particularly for women and children. And so, see, I told you that to remind me. What it said was, we're developing an action plan. Go to World Health Organization and Google it. It's a 15-year plan, and forensic nurses are a huge part of it. Now, what would I tell you? In a nutshell, be a leader. I've used the word passion many times in saying I have a passion for forensic nursing. I don't use it anymore because I've had to say, I want and must be a leader because no one else is stepping up to the plate here. So be a leader. I don't care what you lead in, whether it's pediatric, emergency, cardiac, or whatever. Be a leader. Question, question, question. Don't let the powers that be tell you, well, that's the way we do things here. I testify in court as a legal nurse consultant, and the biggest thing that catches nurses up is their documentation. My students tell me, you taught me how to document. And they might have been in nursing for 15, 20 years. The second thing I would ask you to do is look up vicarious trauma. If you don't know what vicarious trauma is now, look it up. You've already been there, and if you don't deal with vicarious trauma, which is the hurt and pain that you feel when you care for someone who's been injured or in a traumatic situation or life-threatening, you will carry that, and you may end up leaving nursing, and that's the last thing we want you to do. I want every one of you to graduate, as somebody already said, and I want you to look at being part of your organization, your professional organizations. I cannot stress that enough. It's like if you are politically minded and you don't vote, then don't complain. I know I'm out of time. The boys have my contact number, and as my husband says, you will talk to anybody, anytime about forensic nursing, and I will. I promise you.